Hello and most welcome to 7014-1 of the Heidegger series. This will be a first, so to speak, summary and looking into meeting a new writer that occasionally, previously, turned up in these lectures. His name is Paul Horwich, and excuse me for that, so I can take down the tone a bit here. His name is Paul Horwich, and he's written several books, one among them Wittgenstein's Metaphilosophy. I would say he's the contributor of one of the greatest metaphors for the underlying picture that we mentioned before, the picture that captivates us. For me, the mysteriosity of that unknown became a little bit clearer. I wouldn't say completely clear, but most definitely it changed in the right direction. One of his metaphors was a mathematical, geometrical thought problem. It could be that you heard about this thought problem previously. It reads as following: imagine a piece of string on the very circumference of the earth, tight, taut to the very surface of the earth. If we were to make this string only 1 yard longer or meter, how far from the ground would the string be? And the answer is quite a surprise, I think, to most. It would be 6 inches, or about a little bit more than 10 centimeters. Why do we get surprise? The reason is, and listen carefully now, we have a picture that deceives us in this very instance and sends our thinking off and makes us want to think that the new distance that the string has from the surface of Earth should be much less than a micrometer or picometer, or even an angstrom that somebody suggested. So where did we go wrong? Well, we went wrong when we made wrong analogies. We were thinking that the string is enormously long, and therefore 1 meter is very, very little. So it should affect the string very little in contrast to the Earth's surface. But what we forget or missing by making the analogy wrong, so to speak, is that 1 meter is absolutely nothing, but so is these 6 inches. It is making no difference in the percentage of length at all. It is just because we analogize most probably with ourselves. And for us, 10 inches or 6 inches is perceptible, therefore too much. Taking ourselves or our surroundings in this case is absolutely the wrong analogy to make. But it's very hard to know those things. In this way is exactly how the false or the captivating picture that we are under, as proposed by Wittgenstein, in that very way it's working. And it does its work on the unconscious side. We are not aware of it. It does its tricks unaware. Therefore, the influence is massive. So, the mission that Wittgenstein took was to lead the reader, or the one interested in this, to an understanding how the picture is working, and in the end having a pretty good clue about its doings. And that's all that Wittgenstein wants to do. He has no purpose in eradicating the picture. He wants to make it conscious, so that we take it in, and therefore we will be able to decide for ourselves what analogy to use, and of course when and for what purpose. There are several analogies. Another one is 5 motel guests that pays $30 for a room, but then in the reception it gets discovered that the fee for the room is only $25. The reception sends the bellboy up with the remaining $5 in cash, but he only gives $1 each to one of the tenants and keeps $2 for himself. If we were to add the $9 the people paid, that is $10 minus 1 and times 3, that would make 27. Adding the $2 the bellboy has in his pocket, that would make 29. $1 would be missing. Once more, we're making a false analogy. All the $5 needs to be added, and we cannot mix subtraction and addition in that unlawful manner. And it is a case not of bad math, but of wrongful, erroneous parallels. Therein lies the problem. I have some hints here what the picture could be about. Still working on the details, but of course, as often mentioned before, especially by Fisher and Joachim Schulte, it's that the emerging idea that we have perceptions. The idea that there is an outsideness that, so to speak, impinges on our sensory mechanism and make a sort of still life or a photograph of the outsideness of reality that gets stored in the inner. This is most definitely something that is caused by the underlying picture and that makes us make a wrongful analogy from the knowledge we have at hand. And this is when we happen in the idea that is so attacked by Wittgenstein with his private language argument, showing that it is no possibility to have an internal seer that would somehow understand visual, hearing, experience, and be able to clear out what's happening on the outside. Fisher calls that the confusion of the outer space with the perceived inner space, where we start thinking that there is also an inner space somewhere in the inside, our consciousness, where these things are taking place, almost like a cinema of kind, a kinematographic device of the inside, where we watch the outer reality and we have some sort of inner space where everything gets depicted, imagined in pretty correct format, more or less. Somewhat like the 3D animations of Star Wars. I think there was a game of chess that looks three-dimensional, but it's somehow on the outside. That is, of course, not the only complication. Another paradox that I, and I think many others, have been forced to accept or just put it down into one's forgetfulness is, how do we have access to the outsideness of the world? And to adding the two mistakes, how or where is consciousness situated in this outsideness? Where does it reside? And that could be furthered, but epistemology is almost entirely based on this picture. Like, how do we get access, and how do that inner kinematographical insight get the right pictures of the outsideness that perpetually is going on. How are the two cinemas coordinated if you also start to call the outsideness another sort of movie theater or theater only? These problems, I think we have a pretty keen awareness, can never ever be solved in any way. Actually, according to Wittgenstein and his interlocutors, an answer would never come about because the question is absolutely wrongly put. It is coming from this false picture that tricks us, captivates us to start thinking in strict terms of an outsideness. It's a general problem of indirectness and a false sharedness, often referred to as objectivity or the objective. It makes us vulnerable to all sorts of mood change in this shared world, or perceived to be shared world. And that will lead to even more unanswerable or wrongly put questions about the true nature of reality, for instance. What is the arche? A question put by the philosophicos of Asia Minor already about 500 years before our common era. It's the idea that the outsideness, the kinematographic setting or scenery of the world is somehow absolutely disjunct to our knowledge of it, our thinking, and even the concepts that we have. especially Paul Johnston has went very far into showing that actually our concepts are completely tangled with the things or what we experienced. One of the depictions shows this very clearly, with 3 cogs sticking up. If a look at these 3 cogs is accompanied by the phrase, "Do you see the teeth of the cogs?" we will think that they are upside, that they are hill-like. But if the word downside comes up, we will see them as indentations or slopes, valleys. It will make a completely different impression. The words are tangled with what's coming to be. It is not in any way disjunct, ever. But in the kinematographic idea that we live inside a movie, inside a movie, that will cause us to start wondering, what is the reality of the movie? And we come up with explanations. And somewhere in this development, we get the construction of mind. Fisher and Horwich see that as a rather modern construction, stemming somewhere from late Renaissance, early Enlightenment, and it's a change in how we use words like mind and perceiving, sort of twisting it even more into the direction of we perceiving an outsideness. We are into that theatrical scene just as visitors, having almost no connection at all with that world, and our language unconnected, untangled to whatever is out there. And in this era, and I would say that's a true connection, it's also when we get the first strong development of empiricism. So sorry for the interruption and we continue the trodden path. I'll show you the book Wittgenstein's Metaphilosophy by Paul Horwich. Paul Horwich develops an interpretation of Ludwig Wittgenstein's later writings, in particular his philosophical investigations. One could say quite, I don't think it would be an exaggeration, despite its inviting format as a book not too dense, it can give the impression that it's an easy read. And in a way it is. It's easy to read and understand what is written. Worse, though, is to acquire the skill, I think it is. Most philosophy books are about reading of a specific explanation of things, how things are. What is their arche or true nature, if you like. What is there a stain? What's the build-up of this outer world, if you're talking about something like empiricism or epistemology, or if you turn the table on the other side, you have philosophy of consciousness. What is the mind? What is thinking? What is the insideness? And I think we find questions like morality often situated on the inside side of the whole thing. Some subject, I think, and in the list that Horwich made, I'll see if I can put a link to that list. Scientism comes as number one. Scientism has the practicality of, in an odd way, at the same time, both cover as an explanation insideness and outsideness. That simultaneous grouping of explaining, and here explaining comes in, what is perception, what is the perceiving organs, how does experience take place in this inner space of our consciousness. And how does vision work? What is its workability? Is it lights of sun ray that hits a surface of something and then sort of gets reflected into the insideness of our black box, that is our experience organ number one, the eyes, the retina, and the brain. And going further in this process, we get the idea of an engraving going on also, where the things that you experienced gets recorded. So memories are small containers for the outsideness that once upon a time was experienced. And it remains outside of experience, but it's taken in by the insideness, sort of taken like a paparazzi photographer that runs away with the last photo of Lady Di or something similar, to be stored deep inside ourselves in the memory banks. And then at a convenient moment demanded to the fore by the mind who wants to read it, understand it, or use it as a remembrance. We covered quite some territory in this with Paul Johnston, and at the very outset when reading him you get the idea that it is not so complicated, but paradoxes soon evolves. It's getting more and more contradictory, because the memories and the perceptions and the expressions are not in any doing of any kind. They don't seem to have, as Wittgenstein called, a witz, a point to them. And the more you sort of go into this, the more you get a feeling that there is something most definitely strange going on here. Something that doesn't fit the picture, to use a pun with the Wittgensteinian. Memory, Johnston mentions, often comes without our even demanding them, and only sometimes they have sort of qualities of an image or a depiction or a photograph, if you like. it is much more, and just as we spoke about how thinking can be absolutely instantaneous, what William James called the lightning speed of thought, I would say to some degree also covers the lightning speed of memory, and that there is a very clear second leg of this journey, and that is the understanding that these things are not single-handedly inner. They are rather, even memory is participating. And why would the different words and concepts of what we usually call inner have evolved? For what point? And how can we trust them if there is, as Johnston often mentioned, no corollary of an outsideness to make them innerly valuable? It is like we are losing our footing in the world completely. Almost like we have no connectivity to the doings. Things will also pretty soon lose both truth value and reality. Being real is participating. Something could be called, I don't think Wittgenstein would use the expression, but objective, or maybe rather shared, when several people do the same thing. Not the other option, because it is somehow the same thing. As we talked about in the previous lecture, also same takes aspect seeing. Same is a term in Western language, at least in English, that needs aspect seeing as a corollary. It doesn't mean like the Newtonian Lockean idea of identity out there. No, not at all. Same and different are all words that need their corollary, and they need aspect seeing. So you see that the incredible oversimplification that inner and outer does to the whole understanding gravely cuts away us from understanding, makes it very hard to get close to access, to make such. It covers up, it's blunt, and it's almost like having, if you were a chemist, you would put the two smell-alikes, cyanide and almond oil, into the same cupboard or even the same bottle, thereby constructing absolute havoc on things. And a further way of looking at this is to wonder, where did this delineation originally stem from? Well, it originates, so to speak, not caused by, not like in the idea of an origin, but it definitely starts with the picture. And we get fascinated, and the picture inexorably draws us more and more into the magic world of the picture. And we start forgetting that there even was such a thing as a reality. Another very helpful part of the book, Paul Johnston's Wittgenstein, Rethinking the Inner, is when he brings up knowledge, experience, emotion, to see that those denominations are not categories. They consist of things with only slight resemblance, in Wittgenstein called family resemblance. Something that also is true of the things out there, what we call objects, is also things of family resemblance, things that can only be understood in the play of the language game. They cannot be understood taken out of the play. Just like a pass or a tackle or a fint in football could be understood outside the game. It's like bringing the heat out of a fire. Doesn't even make a slight sense. So I think you can sort of see what the picture does to us. It lures us to accept grave paradoxes, nonsensical things. and we get used to them. And in the end, those nonsensical things makes better sense than what we experience. Because of habit. And there's another thing. Rule following is a complex detail of Wittgenstein's thinking that also could be seen in the light of the game analogy, like the language game. Think about a football game. Think that there are young people trying to learn football. First, maybe they have an introduction into the explainable rules. Could be some pages. But slowly they need to learn the rules that are more inside the game. Things that can only be pointed to when you are in the game and when you have the experience. Only then would the gestures of the trainer mean anything. With your background, your understanding of the game, it wouldn't mean anything to an outsider, or very little. But beware, what the trainer says does not contain the whole game or even an aspect of it. It's not a container, an originator for what the game is. Rather, it accompanies, it is necessary, but it's not anything like causative. It accompanies, and I mentioned earlier, and I'm now coming back to that, how Bernstein rehearsed Elgar's, now the name's gone, Nimbus, Nimrod. Only the players themselves, the musicians, could understand his words, his gestures, and they do not contain the concert or even a part of it. They are not germs, and I would say even a set of notes is not playable by themselves without a conductor, an orchestra, and years of knowledge. Those things are absolutely necessary. I think an analytical philosopher in his heart actually believes somewhere, in order to play football you just need to read the rule book and then stand in the football field. Well, in that case I can recommend the video by Monty Python of two teams of philosophers playing so to say, playing with each other. In reality, there is no game at all in between them. They all read their instructions carefully and do not understand the meaning of the word explanation. It's very far from instruction. I think in that convoluted way where everything can condense to be the germ of reality somewhere inside, the antidote is rather the grammatical rules of Wittgenstein. Those rules are what is evolving inside the football game, and only inside they can be used and understood and acquired. That's where they reside. There can be external rules, but they're not participatory and therefore lack realness to a certain extent. I think also things like morality and ethics can be a complex language game, and where most people today mistake morality for some overt written rules, then you will not play the game properly. It will be an awkward misfit of a game. You will not be playing morality well, and most probably that could be the reason why morality is on the downside today, where people are only looking for like game rules written down somewhere for what morality is. It is like having a piece of paper that describes a painting and say, this signifies the whole painting, and somehow is the germ of the painting, the idea, the true idea of the painting. The painting inhabits the sign. Nothing else is really needed. And of course, such ideas are been around since well before the start of the Common Era. Aristotle, with his potentialities, is very close to how, at least until a couple of decades ago, perceived DNA to be the absolute germ or potentiality of the whole human organism. So just taking a few DNAs, we could construct a human being. That we know today is coming from the picture idea. It doesn't hold true in biology, but with Wittgenstein's help, we can save ourselves an enormous amount of extra work, of confusion, despair, I would say even. Think of the life of, for instance, Daniel Dennett, who went so far into the philosophy of consciousness, thinking that consciousness could be an entity or a real thing. He got stuck in actually kind of accepting that it is part of the language game by denying its existence, whatever that is. What would it even mean to exist if you don't participate? Non-existence and existence amounts to the very same. Nothing really. And the defenders of consciousness, like David Chalmers, Couples Churchlands, and many more today, they are making the same weird mistake, actually, coming from the picture, believing that there is a sort of insideness that perceives, that comes to the mind of perception, and insideness that think, where the thoughts are, sort of say, expanded or broadened, developed, like a film. When you bring it to the developer, it gets developed and you can look at it. Very far from anything that makes any sense whatsoever. And I think I better round off. This was my introduction to the next step in Wittgenstein's metaphilosophy by Paul Horwich. I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant day, afternoon, evening, or wherever you are. Bye bye for now.